Well, Hans Mahncke, welcome to the NatCon Australia podcast.
Thanks for having me on.
Full disclosure, we have known each other quite a long period of time. I first got to know you in Hong Kong when we were associated with a small liberal think tank called the Lion Rock Institute. And my enduring memory of that time was you coming to meetings and always grumbling about corruption in the universities and political favoritism and the like. Since that time, you've gone on to expose all sorts of corruption and political dealings on a much wider scale. How did you get involved in being you sort of so thorough in your investigations of all the political cases that were brought against now President Trump?
Yeah, that's a great question. As you remember, I was just teaching law. I had no involvement in, politics or, anything like that. But I could see the problems. And I mean that generally. I mean, I taught at many universities in many different places. And it's not just the wokeism. There was just plain outright corruption, and I'm talking Western, Eastern, wherever. It was systemic, and I feel that it's just because once you're around for that long, it just kind of creeps in, and so it's always been on my radar. It's always been something that bothers me, and justice in general as well. But yeah, no, there was no politics in the sense of I wasn't running for anything. I wasn't supporting anyone. I wasn't campaigning, or had nothing, not advising. I mean, had nothing to do whatsoever with any of that. When Trump kind of first started running and so on, I was actually very happily ensconced in the Caribbean. I found a lovely kind of little niche there to teach my law courses. Everything super happy. Go to the beach in the afternoon and all good. I think it really started with a fascination with Trump, because when he started running back in June of 2015, for the first time ever, I thought, wow, maybe we can do things differently. And again, the context for that is having seen that the old system was broken. And I don't just mean the universities, I mean just everywhere, central banking, trade. I mean, just anything you look at, it was broken. Relations with China, people never understood that part. So many things were broken. I just thought, fantastic. Finally, we got a guy here who's just going to stir things up and just going to. And then, of course, immediately they came after him with this Russia stuff. And I didn't know it. And I mean, I've been to Russia once in my life when I was a kid, I think just at the airport or whatever. I know nothing about Russia. I know a few Russian people, but I didn't think he knew anything about it either. It just didn't seem like a very plausible thing. And I just started looking into it more and more. And then I just saw all these inconsistencies in the official narrative. And it just sucked me in even more. And then, of course, nowadays you can meet kind of like-minded people online. And I connected with a handful of people who are really, really into this stuff. And then, well, I got really, really into this stuff.
Yeah, I mean, even the most hardcore political junkie struggles to keep up with all of all the names, all the different proceedings that were on foot. And I think mainstream opinion in Australia probably does still think there's probably something to Trump's relationship with Russia. We had a Four Corners series by Sarah Ferguson, which was lavishly produced. She's a very mainstream journalist, holds the primetime weekly interview sort of slot on the national broadcaster, and that was basically, I'm not sure if you've seen it, but that series, embedded in the mind of the Australian public that Trump and Russia there was something to this. And even with the sort of different reports that have come out, I think the impression will be, well, he might have got off on a technicality. Just to put it like directly, is there any evidence that Donald Trump is a Russian agent, or he and his family are subject to Russian influence, either because of his commercial dealings or because of blackmail or otherwise?
It's such a good point, because we always assume, even if we think something has been exaggerated or something has been blown up into something much bigger or whatever, there is a tendency to just assume, well, there was probably a kernel of truth somewhere. And I don't blame people for thinking that at all. And I do that as well. I catch myself thinking that all the time. I just do it less now because of this Russiagate thing, because it was, I dug into this probably more than most people ever would. And no, so the answer is no. There's absolutely nothing to it. But the more I dug, the more I found it was the exact opposite of what it was. It was a hoax that was all made up. But
Mm.
the point is, every single strand of it was made up. Everything, absolutely everything. All the names you mentioned, it's difficult to follow. There's so many names, so many sort of events here, there, and everywhere. Anything you look at in any detail, you'll find out it was exactly the other way around. It was a setup. It was every single person involved in this was either set up or drawn in, had nothing to do with Russia, it was nothing going on. So not just Trump, not just his family, but his entire campaign, his extended sort of circle. No one had anything to do with any of it. It was all made up. And yeah, again, I'll be the first one to admit that that doesn't happen often. Almost always, whenever there's a scandal, even if it's completely blown out of all proportion, there is always like some kernel of truth somewhere.
Mm.
This is different. There is nothing there.
Yeah. I mean, and just for the record, the ABC, which is the public broadcaster here, has never corrected the record or retracted any portion of that lengthy story that was just put online. It's still available online for people who want to get, relive the Russia hoax days. There isn't another, an important Australian connection to this story, right? Because at least according to my understanding, you've got perhaps, additional nuance that you can provide to it. But one of the key tipping points that set off a fully fledged federal investigation of Trump's alleged connections with Russia was a meeting between then Australian Ambassador Alexander Downer in London with a junior Trump campaign official called George Papadopoulos. And that was the pretext that was used. And here's Alexander Downer's briefing to, I think it was to the Five Eyes, was the pretext which was used to get the FBI to say, okay, there's something to this, and justify the tapping and the spying on the Trump campaign and all the rest of it. What have I got that story right, or what additional color needs to be added to it?
No, you do, and it's a fascinating story, and I find it probably more fascinating than most because I've been following this guy for, I don't know, 30 more years. Back in the day, he was supposed to be prime minister. He was on the cusp, and back in the 90s, and it's just such a colorful character and whatever. And so, you know, I know Australia very well. I've been to Australia many times. I have family there and so on. So I'm familiar with, was familiar with this guy, probably more so than most who were looking at this story. So when you heard people out there saying, "Oh, Downer set up this set up the Trump campaign or whatever," it's like, no, he didn't. He's just he's this guy, and so to understand what happened, and you got it right, but the thing is, it was happenstance, but even that part of the story was really part of this hoax. It was triggered by this hoax. Now, when I keep saying it's a hoax, what it is that the Clinton, I really got to start in February of 2016.
Mm.
And we know this because there were some WikiLeaks emails from within the Clinton campaign that came out through Julian Assange, which actually weren't noticed at the time. But afterwards, when you start sifting through these, thousands and thousands of emails, you pick up something. So they had something called the Swiftboat project, where they were discussing internally. This is the Clinton campaign. And what that project was they wanted to smear Donald Trump as a Russian agent. So this is February of 2016, long before Downer, long before any of this other stuff.
Mm.
So it was their idea. They wanted to do that. They thought that's a great kind of smear. Normally you do he had an affair or he had whatever, he was corrupt or whatever. Nope, they went with Russia collusion. That was their idea. So that's in there. We know that for a fact. It was their idea. Now, Downer had this meeting with a Trump campaign aide called George Papadopoulos. It was, very innocuous. Nothing special happened with it. In fact, Downer then wrote a note, which is kind of just a normal protocol when he meets anyone, and then sends it back to Canberra, just to be filed away. And that was it.
Hmm.
A couple months later, so this was in May of 2016. A couple months later, in July of 2016, the Hillary Clinton campaign unrolled this scheme. So they sent people out on CNN and all over the place and said, this Donald Trump, he is a Russian agent and we have information. And, so they kind of just, they put out the scheme, they made it public, they went big.
Mm.
Alexander Downer saw that. And he was like, Oh, hold on. Didn't I meet this Trump guy a couple months ago? And he talked about Russia and stuff. So, ooh, I might know important stuff. So the very next day, Alexander Downer walks over to the American embassy in London and says, "Hey, I have some interesting information for you guys." And that's how it got rolling. But see, again, it's so typical of the entire saga that it started not because of what Downer heard, but because of Downer being triggered by the Clinton people being on CNN and complaining about Russia collusion.
Mm. Were they looking for a pretext and he provided it? Is that what was happening, or um,
Absolutely, that's exactly right. So they had investigations into Trump and his campaign for Russia collusion, which had been um, sort of triggered in the background. So when I said that the Clinton campaign triggered all this in July of 2016, that was sort of the public rollout of this whole
mm,
hoax. But in the background, they'd already been doing different things. So, for instance, they hired a guy called Christopher Steele to write a dirty dossier, completely fraudulent, all made up.
mm,
Steele took this into the FBI in early July of 2016, sort of to try and trigger an FBI investigation. Of course, he didn't tell the FBI that he was being paid by Clinton. He pretended just to be this guy, who found out stuff. So the FBI was already looking into it. So the Downer thing was extremely lucky for the FBI that they kind of it happened.
mm,
And again, it sounds like, oh, what a bunch of coincidences. But all the evidence we have, everything I've looked at, shows that this is the exact sequence of events. There was a meeting between Downer and this guy Papadopoulos. Nothing special happened. Downer made some notes. Something about Russia was mentioned. Okay, no big deal.
mm.
Downer didn't think it was serious enough to raise the alarm or anything. He just filed it. That was it.
Yeah,
A
I
couple
think it's
months
important.
later,
I think
yeah,
it's important to understand the context at the time. You've got this unexpected Republican candidate who was not anticipated to go anywhere near the presidency and was a bit of a joke initially, and so everyone around um, the world in politics was trying to establish some sort of connections to his inner circle, and so there was some guy in London that Alexander Downer had an opportunity to meet. So why wouldn't you meet him and all the rest of it? And there was another thing going on where the traditional centre right in Australia, like the Never Trumpers in the US, were also very hostile to Trump ideologically on things like trade, immigration, foreign policy, and his general style. So they I think, and no wrongdoing alleged towards Alexander Downer, but I think there was. Um, they were willing to believe it possible that he was a Russian agent at the time, right? That they genuinely thought this was a possible thing, or at least it was subject to some pressure. Is that a fair reading, you reckon?
yeah, I completely. I think you're absolutely right to draw attention to the idea that it was a very charged up atmosphere, and everyone was talking about Hillary's emails. The 30,000 deleted emails on her clandestine server. That was in the news almost every day, and
Mm,
so it's very easy from there to then go and then they roll out this Russia hoax, and
mm,
Trump is this completely unknown guy, and yeah, he maybe he had something to do with Russia, and there's no huge blame attached to Downer in my view in terms of what
yeah.
he did. But
Mm,
I think it's very important. I think this is probably the most important part about the whole Downer story,
mm,
to have a look at what his notes said, the notes that he took when he actually met Papadopoulos, the ones he filed away, the ones he didn't flag up or anything because it was just a nothing burger. Um, he said something. Well, Papadopoulos allegedly told Downer that the Russians might have some uh, information about Hillary, which may not. He didn't even say emails. He just said some derogatory information, and who knows? Maybe that will come out, and then Trump will win. Completely innocuous. I mean, a lot of people were saying that. I mean, if you go back and look at newspapers and so on at the time, a lot of people were talking about the fact that the Russians might have Hillary Clinton's 30,000 emails, and we all know they're not just going to be about yoga; they're going to be about all kinds of very bad stuff. So, yeah, what
mm,
if the Russians had it? There was other articles about what if the Chinese had it. I mean, this was just completely standard stuff at the time, and so Downer, I don't even think he over egged it. I mean, he basically took his notes, his contemporaneous notes,
Yep.
took them to the US Embassy and said, "Here, guys, look, take a look." And by the way, very importantly, the notes said that what Papadopoulos said may not even be secret. It says in there, it could be just public information. So
Yeah.
the whole thing was just blown out of all proportion, not by Downer. Okay, maybe we can quibble with the fact whether he really needed to go into the US Embassy in person,
Mm.
maybe you could have asked someone in Canberra to contact someone in DC and just send over this note. But
Mm.
anyway, that aside, that was kind of the end of it. And ever since then, I gotta credit Downer. Every time he's spoken about it, he's basically dismissed the whole thing as a big kind of nothing burger.
Yep.
So credit to him. Even when the U.S. investigators like John Durham, the special counsel, came to speak to him, he said,
Mm.
"Yeah, look, there's really nothing to it." So it the bad part really happened was when the FBI seized the fact that Downer had gone there and said, "Oh, there you go. That's our proof. That's what we needed." And that's when they completely escalated the whole thing. They started something called an enterprise investigation, which is a huge sprawling investigation, and they just that was their trigger. They made it into a lot of made it into a huge thing. Again, a lot of people think Downer must have been part of this plot because it's so convenient, isn't it? But I just have
Yeah.
seen no evidence whatsoever of
No,
that.
I think they want to be busy, these ambassadors abroad, and still want to be in the heart of center of the action. And I, it makes sense to me what you're saying. It was a crazy time, and it was bizarre sequence of events. Just listening to it again, it's sort of hard to kind of believe it transpired as it did. What about Joe Biden? Is he or his family subject to foreign influence because of their business dealings or any compromising material from China, Ukraine, Russia, anyone else? What do you think?
Well, let's start with the fact what he did 5 minutes before Trump was sworn in. I mean, literally at 11:55 a.m. on January 20th, he pardoned his entire family.
Mm.
Um, I think that tells you kind of everything. Now, if we look at the specifics, there was a pattern with the Biden family, and this is not just Joe Biden and his son Hunter; it's
Mm.
also his brother James Biden. Um, and James Biden's wife, and then the circle gets bigger and bigger at that point. So what happened is every time that Joe Biden was put in charge of somewhere or sent somewhere to do something by Obama when he was vice president,
Mm.
Hunter and James Biden would quickly follow and start getting money out of those places. So we had that pattern in China. So Joe Biden goes on this official visit to China. This is where he supposedly sat down with Xi Jinping and talked for, I don't know, 25 hours or whatever. Yeah, he
Mm.
talks a lot, does Joe Biden, makes up stories and so on. But, obviously he was there. We've seen all the footage and so on. And he brought Hunter with him. You can see them getting off the plane and meeting the dignitaries and so on. It was during that time that Hunter was then started getting into all kinds of deals with people within the Chinese entourage. And very shortly after, they started a company that Chinese and Hunter did in New York. So this is
Mm.
like 2 weeks after the trip. So obviously it's got something to do with the trip. Now, the company never really took off, but what happened is that company was used as a kind of a place to funnel money through. So the Chinese would keep kind of topping up the account in New York, and then Hunter would disperse that amount to himself and to James Biden, the brother. So we have that. That was all on Hunter's laptop. So we have the records of that.
Well,
And
was
they
like those funds, how were they characterized? Were they, ostensibly, were they lobbying fees, or how were they described? Were they just a flat out
business
bribe?
development,
Mm.
international business development. So
Right.
supposedly, in order to build a business.
Mm.
Um, then the Chinese actually called in it. Well, let's stick with China, and then we can talk about
Yep.
Ukraine and Romania because there's other countries as well. But
Mm.
uh, this is with the Chinese. They actually called in a favor. I mean, you know better than anyone how this works, right? So you send the money. The Bidens are kind of small time criminals in the bigger scheme of things.
Mm.
The amount that they drew for a very long time was 165,000 a month between them. So 82 and a half to Hunter, 82 and a half to James and his wife Sarah. Yeah, for people like us, that's probably a lot of money. I'd love that, but I'm not them. But in the sort of bigger scheme of things, when you look at Clinton Foundation, 120 plus million and so on, it wasn't that much. So, but they drew it for a very long time. This went on and on and on. So, but then some years later, there was a guy called Ho Chi Ping, or Patrick Ho. He was a former official in Hong Kong, but then he became the CEO of this company called CEFC, which is a Chinese energy conglomerate. And that was run by Ye Jiangmin. That was the sort of the president of that group, but I don't think he was doing operative stuff. That was Patrick Ho. That group got involved in various corrupt deals, by the way, with the Bidens as well, but that's never been kind of followed up on. But some corrupt deals in Africa were followed up on. And so when Ho Chi Ping passed through JFK Airport, I think this was in 2017, he was arrested on a corruption charge to do with that company CFC and corruption in Africa. Shortly after the president, he disappeared, Chinese style. We still have no idea what happened with the guy to do with that whole event. The first guy he calls when he has his phone call, this is Ho Chi Ping at JFK Airport, is he calls James Biden, Joe Biden's brother, for help.
Yeah.
So then James gets Hunter involved, and then Hunter becomes this guy's lawyer. And obviously they were expecting the payback. We've been paying you millions over many years here, because this whole thing started in 2012. So by this point, it's been going on for 5 years. So now we want something back. You got to help our guy Ho Chi Ping here. And of course, there's nothing. They weren't so good at the giving back part. There was nothing they could do. So get this. Hunter then took another $1 million. He sent them an invoice for $1 million to be the lawyer. And then all he did was he found another lawyer. And that was it. So he took $1 million for basically recommending a lawyer, and he never helped, and Ho ended up going to jail and so on and so forth. So I'm sure the Chinese were not too impressed with that. Ukraine, I guess everyone's heard about Ukraine. So again, when the Maidan revolution happened in February of 2014, Joe Biden was made sort of I like calling him the viceroy. Many people don't know that word, but it is sort of what he was, because if you look at what he was doing in Ukraine, Joe Biden between 2014 and early 2017, when he was no longer vice president, he was micromanaging that country. He was telling them what laws to write and how to structure their institutions, and on and on and on. Or
why Hans? Why was he so interested in that particular country?
Obama had made him the point man. That's the word they use, point man. And he just, I guess there was he was surrounded. There's people he was surrounded by who had like personal interest there in terms of family or other kind of historic or whatever, like Victoria Nuland, the State Department official, and various other people very invested in Ukrainian matters, and they just decided, we know best. We're going to tell these Ukrainians how to do things. I mean, it started that they picked the prime minister of Ukraine after the Maidan revolution. That guy was picked by Joe Biden and Victoria Nuland. And for a time, the country didn't have a president. Then they got this guy Poroshenko, and there was some phone calls leaked between Biden and Poroshenko, a whole series. And all these calls are basically Biden telling this guy how to run his affairs and what to subsidize. And there was a bank he was supposed to nationalize, and constantly just telling him stuff. So it's a really good question. I think other people were telling Biden to do this, but it's largely unexplored as to why that happened.
Yeah, it seems like in the broader sweep of things, there's a real mismatch between the focus that is placed on Donald Trump's alleged, connections with Moscow, and the lack of interest or the lack of focus that's placed on these quite extensive commercial and other dealings that the Biden family had with Ukraine. And I think, is it not plausible that part of the reason why the Democrats and others decided to continually to make these claims about Trump was to sort of deflect from the real story?
Oh, for sure. I have no doubt that one of the reasons why Russiagate suited Democrats in general, not
Mm,
just Hillary Clinton, is because it can be used to paint Russia as the bogeyman. And as long as Russia's bad, no one's going to really look at Ukraine. Ukraine good, Russia bad. Just in oversimplified terms. I'm absolutely sure that that's a big part of it. Um, but what happened in China happened again in Ukraine, because as soon as Joe Biden was made the point man in February of 2014, guess what? A month later, Hunter shows up in Ukraine. Well, didn't. This is the other thing. He never actually traveled there, but he took a huge salary out of this Ukrainian energy company called Burisma.
mm,
So what happened is that the owner of Burisma was in the cabinet that had been deposed in the Maidan Revolution, a
mm,
guy called Zlochevsky. So he was deposed. And he thought, I have no idea who's coming in. Our country is, all over the place. The Americans are running it. I need protection.
mm,
And so he started paying Hunter $1 million a year. That's the declared amount. There's probably more money coming. Again, not, I mean, yeah, for me, huge money, but in terms of those bigger schemes of things, not like that much money. But the Bidens were, were cheap. You could buy them for not much. So, and that was the protection that they bought, and they called in the protection as well. Zlochevsky did, because eventually he was investigated, as was predictable, by the new government. It had to happen, right? He was in the old government; they had been deposed. He had signed over some very nice energy deals for himself, for his company. There's a lot of corruption going on.
mm.
So he was found to have, the prosecutors found that there was a lot of problems there. And then they went and seized all his stuff. So they seized all the properties of this guy, Zlochevsky, the owner of the company that Hunter was being paid by. And that's when the whole thing happened with the prosecutor, when Joe Biden had that prosecutor fired. And again,
Mm.
everyone's seen the tape. I mean, he bragged about it. Um,
Yeah.
and if you look at the timeline, if you look at when it happened and what happened and so on, there's even an email from the chairman of the board of Burisma. So the
Mm.
kind of the number two behind Zlochevsky, an email to Hunter Biden saying, make these problems go away, make these cases stop. You do it. We pay you, you do it. That's in there. And
Yeah.
3 weeks later, Joe Biden is over in Ukraine telling Poroshenko to fire the prosecutor.
Yeah, I mean, it's so interesting and detailed. The only question I have now is that, given the pardons that have been issued, um, will there ever be kind of legal accountability for the players that were involved, that were, engaged in what certainly seems like corrupt dealings, or, improper influence peddling operations? I mean, does the fact that the pardons were issued impede the ability for us to fully hold people accountable and get to the truth of it all?
Yeah, I mean that door's been shut. I mean, these pardons. I mean, some people say, if because he signed them with auto pen, it doesn't count, and you know, realistically, it's over. That's over. There's going to be nothing there. Um, and it's probably also kind of bad politics to try and do much in terms of that, because then next time it's their turn, they're going to start questioning your pardons. So I don't think anything's going to happen there. I mean, I'd love to see some transparency. Never mind, people going to jail or whatever. But let's just have some transparency, because again, I'm not going to get into details, but just to finish off on this the scheme, right? They did exactly the same in Romania, and then they tried it in Kazakhstan too. So it's always the same pattern. Joe
Yeah.
Biden gets appointed as point man here and there to run things, to do things, to send money there, to manage things. A few weeks later, Hunter Biden and James Biden show up again and again, the same thing. The one, I think the most important one, I mean, Ukraine was so dirty what they did there and so on, but I think the most important one to shine some sunshine on is China. In
Mm.
how far, especially because of everything that's going on now and so on, in how far were these people compromised? How much do they, what did they find out about the Bidens when they were over there visiting? Um, what do they know about older Biden's corrupt dealings? Were they blackmailed in any way? I mean, there's a lot of questions that we don't have the answers to.
Yeah. I mean, China, as you know, it's my kind of beat, and understand it at best. But it is amazing the extent of influence that the Chinese government has had on senior politicians in Australia and across the world. Not all of that is illegal, strictly speaking, but it has an impact in the way that the perception of the country, the dealings with the country, the policies that are put in place towards a particular country. And there are consequences. We have used to live in Hong Kong, and that's no longer quite the place it once was. So it all matters. A different question, just to sort of change kind of gears. What do you understand by the term deep state?
It's one of those, isn't it, where everyone has their own kind of
Mm,
uh, sense for it, or you know, I I I don't know. It's evolving, but one thing
mm,
I can say for sure is that it's much more concrete now than it was before Trump ever became president.
mm,
Um, Back then, it was a kind of a bit of a derogatory term in terms of government running things behind the scenes and doing shady things, and bureaucrats being corrupt, and just sort of a wide term that just describes all these different things, but without any specificity. I think because of Trump and because of what they've done to Trump,
mm,
and the they is the deep state, I think we have a lot more specificity now. And I certainly, in my mind, I'm much clearer about what it means than, I'd say even not just 10 years ago, but even 5 or 3 years ago.
mm,
Um, I think first of all, it's not like it's not like a James Bond movie where this villain who sits there with a cat or whatever. That person doesn't exist. There isn't a puppet master anywhere.
mm,
I think of it more like an ant colony where everyone kind of knows what they're doing, and many of them know it just on autopilot. You don't even have to tell them what to do.
mm,
So, who is everyone? Well, I think at the core of it is the bureaucracy. That's sort of the biggest part of it. Of course, it's also the intelligence community. It's law enforcement. It's it spreads, but the bureaucracy is sort of the core of it, where you just have this completely entrenched system where those people, again, it's not that they wake up every morning and say, "Oh, we're gonna do bad things to Trump," or "We're gonna, stop this or that." It's automatic.
mm,
They want to maintain their little fiefdoms, and it's so entrenched and it's been growing. All it's ever done in its entire history, the bureaucracy has only been growing.
mm.
It's never flattened off or it went down or whatever. It's always been growing, and they just want to keep it that way. And that's sort of at the core of it. And so the reason why and they don't want bad things to come out. So, for instance, when you look at the COVID origin cover up, that's a great example of really specifying what is deep state, because you had so many disparate groups all pulling in the same direction, and that direction was the direction of the lie, not the truth. So
Mm,
you had the medical people in government, NIH, NIH, CDC, all those people. You had the people at the State Department. You had the people in Congress. I mean, you had all over the map. You had people for various reasons who all pulled in the wrong direction on
mm.
COVID origin. I just find it so fascinating because normally with most things you find, some people are on this side, some people are on that side, but here you found everyone was on the same side, but for different reasons.
Yeah, I think of it as, and correct me if you think I'm wrong, but it's like the ABC public broadcaster, but the same mindset, unexamined ideological biases. Um, they want to believe things are true, and then the wheels are set in motion, and then everyone has their job to do, and it's very hard to stop. That particular train from leaving the station and continuing on. And there are also, no doubt, bad actors and corrupt actors internally as well. But it's the whole organization. It's really the organizational issue more than anything else. Do you think there's a possibility now with the new appointments under the Trump administration that there will be some genuine change?
Not yet. I mean, I hope there will be. I don't. Nothing has happened yet that has gone deep enough that it couldn't be undone by a new president within a few weeks.
Mm,
Um, all these programs they ended, they can just restart them. There hasn't been anything really truly fundamental. I mean, they talk about getting rid of the Department of Education. So if that happened, that would be much more difficult to revive because you'd have to rebuild the whole thing from scratch. Um, but nothing like that has happened yet. I hope it will, but well, you see the resistance. As soon as anyone is fired, there's a bunch of lawsuits. There's a bunch of injunctions. There's just what they call lawfare. There's just this constant obstruction, obstruction, obstruction. And then, of course, the media as well. I mean, nonstop obstructing as well. And by the way, I didn't say that earlier, but I'd add the media to the deep state again as well. But without um, without it, I just don't like this puppet master idea. I just don't think that exists. So, for instance, just let me give you one quick example here. The other week, we on Russiagate, some new information came out. And I don't want to bore you or your viewers with all the details or whatever, but it was about an FBI lawyer who had been corrupt during the probe, and he was actually convicted on that. He was
Mm.
called Kevin Kleinsmith. And every single media outlet called him a low-level FBI lawyer or low-level official, or but the low level, that those two words were in every single. You could go to Bloomberg, New York Times, CNN, whatever everyone called him that. Now, is that because someone in the deep state told them, let's spin this as a nothing burger because he's just a low level guy? Did someone send out a memo? Yeah, see, I don't think so. I think deep state is like the ant colony where everyone knows, okay, we'll just do that. And maybe it's because the New York Times leads with it and everyone copies it or whatever. But the point is, they don't have to communicate with each other. This is on automation.
Mm. Yeah, but what about with the appointment of like Deepak Patel and Tulsi Gabbard into these national security organizations? Isn't that, don't they? Do you not believe they have uh, a a real incentive and interest in unearthing a lot of the shenanigans that went on over the last couple of years?
They certainly do, but I mean, let's just talk about Patel here for a moment. So he obviously knows RussiaGate very well. He was one of the people involved in investigating it during Trump's first term, and a central player in investigating it, in unearthing the truth. Um, he knows where the bodies are buried on that and many other things, but let's just focus on that because what happened is when he came in, everyone expected him to release all the stuff, all these hidden documents, and there's still a lot that we haven't seen. For instance, we talked earlier about Alexander Downer. It, the all the documents pertaining to him, in terms of, we have what he released, but we don't have what the U.S. government has in terms of his interview and all these things. It might be esoteric, but it's very interesting, for people like me and a lot of people who want to see that. There's also a lot of other stuff about Barack Obama's involvement and so on that hasn't been released yet. So everyone, when Patel came in, everyone was saying, "Oh, great, we're going to see it," and we haven't seen it. And it's been what, 100 days? I mean, didn't count, but it's been a couple of months or so, and I think that they're just being obstructed. I mean, I know for sure that Kash Patel would love to release this stuff. There's no question in my mind whatsoever that if he could, he would, but he hasn't, and that's because of
Mm.
there's obstructionism going on. I mean, when Robert Kennedy came in um, into Health and Human Services, supposedly he was immediately gonna, cancel gain of function experiments, that brought us COVID, and do this and do that and whatever. And it's been a slog. It's been sort of slow in terms of things actually happening, and you can go through the whole list. So I think it's just because of the obstruction that these people are encountering. What's happened is you've replaced the top layers with good people. During
Mm.
Trump's first term, that didn't happen. The top layer, they were equally as bad as all the other ones, because Trump, was new and he just relied on establishment people, and so nothing happened. Now he's got good people. Tulsi is fantastic, by the way. I mean, isn't it great? I mean, that she
Uh,
got the job of the
uh, I think it's yeah, the first Trump administration was disappointing, but I feel like, and it's almost like a hackneyed statement now, but because he lost, or supposedly lost in 2020, the people that stuck with him and were subject to sort of all sorts of unfair targeting have been tested in fire. and they've come to better understand in a more comprehensive way the Trump agenda, like J.D. Vance, who wasn't actually completely on board with Trump at the first time around either, and now can understand it and articulate it and all the rest of it. So I mean, it gives me hope, right? You've got to have something. Can't be completely black-pilled the whole time. These guys, he's appointed people to these organizations. Yeah, it takes a while for them to actually get the bureaucracy machinery moving and to make sure that all the I's and T's are looked after. But you would think that they are trying to now ensure greater transparency, and just simply the fact that, like, I think there was a real real credibility problems within these organizations, and the very fact that you've appointed noted critics to now head them up is a sort of it's the only thing you could do if you're looking to genuinely restore credibility in those organizations, right? I mean, so yeah, what would be something that you would like to see in the next couple of months, which would sort of satisfy you that we're making real progress?
I'd like to I'd like to see the documents. There's so many things that they're holding back, and again, I don't think it's because of not wanting to release it. It's just because of bureaucratic obstruction.
Mm,
And they'll come up with all kinds of reasons. If you say President Trump, he declassified everything, we can just release it. No, because there's the Privacy Act, or there's this, or there's that, and you can't do this, and there's the civil servants rules about this and that, and people's names, and
mm,
on it. They could just hold you up for years and years and years. So it's going to be really tough. But I think in terms of the structural changes, the most important. So there's a couple of things going on in terms of the structural changes. I think they have to downsize the government big time, big time.
mm,
And they've been finding that extremely difficult, especially every time they fire anyone. They're in court and being held up. But that's even aside from what these individuals are doing. That's just because the government is too bloated. So they got to do that.
mm,
In terms of transparency, they just got to release a whole bunch of stuff, and that hasn't happened either yet. Um, so, for instance, one of them would be a COVID origin. I mean, they have a lot of stuff that they haven't released.
mm,
Um, all the intelligence about the Wuhan lab that they've had since the beginning. Um, we haven't seen any of it in terms of we've been given these snippets or told, back in November of 2019, we knew because we had satellite data, or we had phone data, or this or that. We had human sources down in the lab or near the lab or whatever. Um, Anyway, we haven't heard anything about that. You could talk about Russiagate, of course. We already talked about that stuff being released there. There's one that's sort of very close to the hearts of a lot of Trump supporters, which is January 6th. Like,
yeah.
in how far was the FBI embedded in that, and who was agitating? And I'm sure there were some. I'm sure there were also completely organic, people there who did stuff they shouldn't have done. But again, there's a lot of stuff that can be released which hasn't been released. And then I think the third one, that's the only one where I'm really seeing a lot of change, is China. Because
Mm,
I think Trump 2.0 understands that China is sort of the big elephant in the room. And unless you take care of that, all this other stuff about transparency and downsizing the bureaucracy, none of that matters if you don't take care of China. And he truly understands that. And I think he understands it for two reasons as opposed to Trump 1.0.
mm,
The first is, I don't want to kind of, I think you and I probably knew this a long, long time ago,
mm,
that deals are just never, ever worth the paper they're written on, ever. They'll just renege, they'll cheat,
yeah,
they'll whatever. It's just a thing. I mean, once you've visited there many times, I've been visiting there for like 40 years. I taught there. I did a lot of things. It's just, you learn that. I don't think he knew that in his first term. I think when he did his trade deals in 2018, he actually thought they were gonna, do something. They were gonna abide by that. For instance, they were going to buy 200 billion worth of U.S. farm products. And I think they ended up buying pretty much nothing.
yeah,
So I think that's a lesson learned, 100%. The other thing I think is just personal to him, because I think he thinks that I don't know this. I don't have any special information, but it would seem to me that he thinks they cost him his second term because of COVID and lying about COVID and everything to do with COVID. and there's probably some personal animosity from that as well, which I don't really care about the motivation. I'm just so happy that for the first time in my lifetime, certainly, there's someone who understands that China is a problem, like truly understands it. Now we
Yeah.
only have it in the US, not in Canada, not in Australia, not in Europe. They haven't gotten it yet, but at least we
No.
have Donald Trump who gets it.
Well, he's got it in a different way to some in Australia. There's a lot of butchy talk about, defense in Australia with respect to China, but at the same time, the commercial relationships continue. So there's an incoherence there with the approach. But Trump at least recognizes that there needs to be some sort of like decoupling um, that occurs between these economies. Otherwise, you will get influence. It will influence your political process to be so enmeshed in this economy, which operates in a different way to what we understand in the West, or at least used to. Yeah. You mentioned January 6th. I mean, I think again, to shift mainstream opinion in Australia, I think it would be useful if there were some sort of new investigation into that to release a lot of relevant information, because it is still portrayed here as akin to Pearl Harbor or some type of like, no, it really, a threat to democracy. The number of times you see that written in the paper about Trump because of this horrendous January 6th episode. And John Howard, the former prime minister, he basically says he can't support Trump fully because he didn't obey the umpire's decision and encouraged January 6th. All this stuff, which if you're in the weeds like you are, you follow it closely enough, is just a partial truth, if at best. So do you think there'll be more that comes out on that, which will be useful to sort of try to inform public opinion better?
Probably not. Everyone's been pardoned.
Yeah,
Trump did that sort of first day, first minute, really. He just signed it, and then everyone was out by that evening on January 20th. Um, good on him for doing that. I mean, many people thought, oh, you reelect him and then he's going to, get soft on it or whatever. No, he didn't. He's like, okay, I got to get these people out.
yeah,
I think the reason we're probably not going to see much more on that is because of what you say. It's always the two sides to it. On the one hand, yeah, you might bring some transparency and you might bring out some truth or whatever. On the other hand, that narrative is so entrenched. The narrative that these guys are terrorists and so on and so forth, that every time you just mention it, even if you mention it and trying to do something good and trying to bring transparency, whatever, it just reminds a lot of people of that whole thing. And Trump is very good at persuasion, and he understands. I mean, he's fantastic at marketing, all that kind of stuff. So he understands there's benefits and detriments, and there's probably too many detriments to doing it. He's sort of we've done it now. Everyone's free now. Let's kind of move on. In a way, the same applies to Russiagate. I mean, it would be great, as you say. A lot of people still believe there was some there, and 100% there was nothing there. So he should, in my view, of course, if I wear my kind of Russiagate hat, I'm like, you should pursue that. You should make people understand that. But I can also understand that he might be thinking about it in terms of, well, there's a lot of people who think I had something to do with Russia, a lot of people who understand I didn't. But if I keep talking about it, I'm not going to move anyone because all these feelings are so entrenched. So let's just talk about something else. I think that's probably what's going on.
yeah. No, I think that's very much his marketing brain as well. It's just sort of disappointing sometimes for you or I, who really want the truth to be known fully and fairly, so that, because otherwise you have these situations where he pardons people on January 6th, but they're terrorists or they're responsible for Pearl Harbor. There's an incongruence there in the public mind. I mean, how can you do that if A is true? How can B be justifiable behavior? So who knows? Maybe it's like information just moves so quickly. People haven't got time to sort of go through it in a meticulous way. You have. Hans, what do you think about lawfare in general in Western democracies? It's sort of, I read old, a lot of Roman history and stuff, and late stage Roman Republic, there was increasing political corruption, but there were also, people that made their name with cases, political corruption cases, like Cicero, most famously, I suppose. This wasn't always a feature of Western democracies. Yes, you had Watergate, but it wasn't as though like the president and people around him on either side we're constantly being hit and having to deal with lawfare. Is there a way this can be ended, or is Pandora's box been opened now? And we'll never put back those demons back in.
I think in the United States, it can only be ended if the Supreme Court issues a whole range of rulings covering a whole range of possible topics, uh, general rulings with general application in terms of what these lower level district judges cannot do.
Mm,
So, for instance, no more broad injunctions. Injunctions only for people um, who are actually litigants in the case. You had a whole number of cases these past few months where Mr. ABC brings a case, and then the judge just expands it to the entire category of person represented by that guy, whether it's people who are going to be deported, or people who work at some department, or people in the military under some label, or whatever. Um, so you could narrow that down. I
mm,
don't know if the Supreme Court. My guess is they'll narrow some of it down and not others, so you'll always be stuck with it. But your point is really well taken, because it's not just in the U.S.
mm.
Um, you see it in Europe as well, where the voices that are not wanted are shut down, often by law. I mean, Germany is terrible with their anti-free speech laws, where they harass you and harass you until you just shut up. And that's lawfare as well. UK as well, with the free
Marine,
speeches.
Marine Le Pen, she was the
That's
presidential
lawfare as well.
candidate.
Absolutely. Um, and there was so much misrepresentation on that point. I mean, um, as if she took the money for herself, or as if she was corrupt or whatever. It was just basically allocating money to one staffer from paying him from that pot instead of that pot. I mean, it's absolutely ridiculous. And then immediately ban her from running, which that wasn't even part of that wasn't a mandatory sentence or whatever. That was just the judge
I
decided. I'm
had
just going to
someone from the French right explaining that in detail a couple of
Yeah,
episodes
it's
in it.
horrific. But so unfortunately, I think you're right. This is sort of genie's out of the bottle and not going back in, and that's really bad. But we're both lawyers. We know that law has always been more about sort of societal convention rather than anything else. It's
Mm.
like everyone agrees that we will do what the judge says, and everyone agrees that this is the umpire, and we're just gonna go with it, even if we're not happy with it, and on and on and on. Just that sort of, yeah, it's a societal consensus, really, what it is, because well, we all know that the judge doesn't have an army, so the judge needs to always be reasonable in order to maintain, their acceptance, and so that people do follow what they say. I mean, we could talk for ages just about this. Is this a fascinating topic in and of itself? But um, that genie's out of the bottle, because a lot of people just don't trust these judges anymore. Certainly in the U.S., it's just half the people just have absolutely no trust in them whatsoever,
Mm.
and that is so difficult to undo. That's so difficult to go back and say, no, we're gonna trust judges whether they rule in favor of us or not, because once you start on this lawfare path, and once the judges take sides, and the judges could have also said in many of these cases, we're just not going to get involved, or you have no standing, or whatever. You can come up with all kinds of reasons. They didn't. In many cases, they didn't do that. So, this is going to be very tricky in the years and decades ahead of kind of civil war. I don't necessarily mean actual civil war, but in terms of having factions in countries which are very difficult to reconcile.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, there's a broader discussion to be had about the training of lawyers and the culture that exists in the elite institutions, and how they lean overwhelmingly left in a whole lot of different ways, and how that flows through down the system, where people have these biases that just aren't recognized as such, and so proceed in a particular way without thinking that maybe there might be another type of side to this, or maybe not be these particular things we're rolling out may not be actually, on the grand scheme of things, in the best interests of our country. Um, Speaking of lawyers and legal training, so you still teach law. I mean, if people go online, they'll see Hans. talking about all this Russia hoax stuff, but also giving YouTube lectures on contract law. What are you doing with your time these days, Hans? You've got a book out. You've got you are you consulted at all by the administration about the detail of in any way? Because these stories were broken by independent journalists a lot of the time, and many times the independent journalists who have the time to focus on it understand the issues far better than anyone you know um, in the administration or who have other things to worry about.
No, no, I haven't. I'm just a private guy. I just do this for well, both a hobby and, of course, as you say, I wrote a book about it all because I wanted to memorialize the whole story, because the Russiagate story, that is, because it it only existed in sort of online in bits and pieces.
Mm,
All the different elements we talked about earlier. Um, you could have a news article here that may or may not be true. You can maybe have something on Twitter here, and so I just kind of wanted to um, bring it all together. And so I have the book. I also do like articles. I write and put stuff out. So I've kind of one thing I've given up on, and that has to do with how we started off our conversation here, is faculty, being in a faculty. I just did that. That's just it's just become so poisonous, so toxic for the reasons you mentioned,
mm,
in terms of leftists, and but also just uh, corruption, politics. You get sucked into it. But most people in the faculty are that's like their life. It's like,
mm,
you're constantly there's this faction, that faction. You're constantly vying for better spot, better teaching assignments, less this. Like, you want sabbatical ahead of the other guy. I mean, it's just it's like you're continuing school forever. Where you have your
yeah.
little cliques and fights and so on. So I never liked that. I never enjoyed that. So at some point, a few years ago, I just went into teaching part time,
Mm,
which is much more pleasant, because you have nothing to do with that. All you do is you go and do your teaching, and at the end of the year you mark some exams, and you're done. So much happier that way, and then just doing other things on the side.
yeah. Well, look, I recommend everyone purchase the book if you're looking for a comprehensive, explanation of what went on. It is hard just like watching, 5 minutes news clips on this point or the other to sort of piece the full story together. But you've done it like I said, in a very systematic, detailed German type of way. And I benefited from it, and it is useful to get that straight, so that the kind of the historical record is accurate. History does matter. If people want to find out more about you, or follow you, what's the best way to do that?
Well, I'm in terms of social media, I'm just really on Twitter or X. So
Mm,
it's just my name on X without a space, just Hans Mahncke, just one word. Um, and that's the same for the book, just with the .com. That's the website. Probably have a little bio there as well on the website. I can't even remember. It's a while ago that I did that, but it's definitely, you can definitely find the book there. Um, yeah, no, that's it. I kind of limit Twitter. It takes up enough time as it is. I don't want to get active in other ways as well.
I hear you. Man. Look, great to catch up. I've enjoyed the conversation. I'm sure there'll be this won't be the end of political cases or foreign influence or China or any of these type of issues which we're discussing today. So it's just good to actually touch base with a guy you've known for a long period of time, who's been thinking about these things for as long as I have. So yeah, great to catch up, and I'll pop all the contact things in the show notes. Thanks again, Hans.
It's a great pleasure. Thank you so much.
Cheers, man. Bye. Hey,